Ida for telling my grandparents I have no family? I was 16 when I decided to finally try to understand my life, but even thinking about it felt like wandering into a maze without an exit. I don't know how much of the background I need to share to make sense of it all, but I'll do my best to unravel the tangled threads. My parents had an on and off relationship for as long as I could remember. The concept of stability was as foreign to me as a distant planet in the night sky. Whether they were married or divorced wasn't even clear to me anymore. Their history, rooted in high school sweethearts cliché, had evolved into a messy cycle that seemed impossible to break. They were young when they first got together, teenagers who thought love could conquer anything. By the time they were 19 or 20, they were married, or at least that's what they told me. At some point, they divorced. Then they remarried. The timeline of their relationship was like a book with chapters torn out, leaving only fragments for me to piece together. Sometimes I wondered if there were more marriages and divorces that they hadn't mentioned, lost in the haze of their chaotic love story. I was born when they were in their early 30s, which, to some, might seem like a time for stability and maturity. For my parents, it was just another phase of their perpetual cycle of togetherness and estrangement. My earliest memories were marked by their fights, their separations, and their reconciliations. There were times when I wouldn't see one of them for months, sometimes even over a year. Once, my mom was absent for 13 or 14 months. Another time, it was my dad who disappeared for 11 months. Other periods were shorter, maybe 4 or 5 months, but the gaps in my life where one parent should have been were glaringly obvious. The rhythm of their departures and returns became the drumbeat of my childhood. The absence of one parent meant the other would return, and that was as close to normalcy as I ever got. But the pain of those long stretches of absence settled into me like a permanent ache, a dull throb I couldn't shake off. It wasn't just their inconsistency that hurt, it was the indifference of everyone else around me. The extended family was no better. Whether or not I saw them depended on the status of my parents' relationship. My grandparents, uncles, and aunts seemed to treat my presence as a byproduct of my parents' dysfunction rather than a chance to offer support or love. When I expressed sadness or confusion about the absence of a parent, they told me to buck up and act my age, as if being young made my feelings any less valid. I remember the helplessness of asking to stay at a family member's house during one of my parents' more explosive fights, only to be met with excuses and rejection. Each refusal chipped away at the illusion that family would always be there for me. In truth, I felt like an unwelcome visitor in their lives. Nobody wanted me. That was the message I received loud and clear. I wasn't a beloved grandchild or nephew, I was a burden, a responsibility no one wanted to shoulder. When my parents fought over custody during their separations, it wasn't about who wanted to keep me but about who had to. Their arguments about me felt colder than any winter storm, a stark reminder that I was more of an obligation than a source of joy in their lives. The fights weren't limited to their interactions with each other. They spilled over into their interactions with me. Their inability to function as a team left me in a constant state of uncertainty. My home wasn't a sanctuary, it was a battlefield. I tiptoed around their tempers, learned to read the subtle signs of an impending blow-up, and tried to stay invisible when the tension became unbearable. The house was silent in the worst way possible when one of them left. But the silence wasn't peace, it was the calm before the inevitable return, when the cycle would start all over again. Looking back, I think the most devastating part wasn't the instability but the way it forced me to confront an awful truth. I didn't have a family. Family, as I understood it, was supposed to be a safe harbor, a place of unconditional love and support. Instead, I had people tied to me by blood and circumstance who treated me like an afterthought. Each of their rejections, each of their dismissals, hammered home the idea that I was alone in the world. I carried this realization with me everywhere, like a heavy, invisible chain. It weighed me down during the quiet moments when I allowed myself to think about what could have been. My parents' on and off marriage, their disappearances, the indifference of my extended family, these weren't just events or circumstances. They were the building blocks of my life, shaping who I was in ways I was only beginning to understand. At 16, I had already built walls around my heart, fortresses designed to keep out the pain of rejection. But those walls didn't make me stronger, they just isolated me further. I didn't know it then, but the loneliness I felt wasn't just a symptom of my circumstances. It was a reflection of a deeper longing, a desperate hope that, somewhere in the chaos, I could find someone who cared. Someone who wouldn't see me as a burden. Someone who would stay. My parents' relationship felt like a never-ending carousel, spinning wildly and leaving chaos in its wake. But the most unsettling part wasn't their breakups, it was the way they fought over who had to take me. Not who wanted to take me, who had to. Their arguments over custody weren't rooted in love or concern for my well-being. They were logistical battles, driven by resentment and a desire to offload responsibility. It stung more than I wanted to admit, and the bitterness lingered long after their voices faded. At one point, they were going through a divorce, though whether it was finalized or not remains a mystery. Their lives were a labyrinth of broken promises and half-truths, so even the legalities of their marriage felt irrelevant. It wasn't like a divorce would change anything for me. Whether they were officially together or apart, my existence was always caught in the crossfire of their dysfunction. When I was 14, a lifeline appeared, almost like a miracle. My two best friends, who happened to be twins, became my sanctuary in ways I could never have predicted. Their family opened a door to a world I had never known, a world of stability, kindness, and generosity. Their parents, unlike my own, seemed to understand what it meant to care for someone. They didn't treat me as an inconvenience or a problem to solve. Instead, they welcomed me into their lives, filling a void I hadn't realized could be mended. It started with small things. Their parents paid me to babysit, though it was more an excuse to let me hang out with my friends than actual work. They would slip me a few bills here and there, just because they noticed I didn't always have what I needed. When one of my parents' breakups left me without lunch money for school, something I only mentioned offhand, they immediately stepped in. They didn't scold me for asking or make me feel ashamed. They simply gave me what I needed, no questions asked. I remember how much it hurt to bring up the forgotten lunches to people who were supposed to care about me, family members who should have stepped up. I told them how my parents had forgotten, how I didn't have food for school, and they shrugged it off like it was nothing. "You'll survive," they said, as if going hungry was just a minor inconvenience. The twins' parents, on the other hand, didn't just fill the gap, they did so with a kindness that made the indifference of my own family even harder to bear. Their support didn't stop at lunch money. They helped me get a part-time job, giving me a sense of independence I'd never felt before. It wasn't just about the money, it was about having control over a small piece of my life. They even went so far as to help me set up a bank account that didn't require an adult. That small act of foresight meant everything to me. It kept my earnings safe, away from the reach of my parents, who had a knack for making everything about them. Having that account felt like the first real step toward breaking free from the chaos. It was a small but significant piece of stability in a world that constantly shifted beneath my feet. The twins' family didn't have to do any of this for me. They had no obligation to step in where my own family had failed. But they did it anyway, and in doing so, they became the closest thing to a real family I'd ever known. For the first time, I felt what it was like to have people who truly cared about me. It wasn't just about the material things they provided. It was the way they made me feel seen and valued. They noticed when I was struggling and offered support without making me feel like a burden. Their kindness wasn't conditional or transactional. It was genuine, and it gave me a glimpse of what life could be like if I weren't constantly surrounded by dysfunction. That contrast between the warmth of the twins' family and the cold indifference of my own was stark and inescapable. Every kind word, every thoughtful gesture, highlighted just how much I had been missing. The twins' parents didn't just help me survive, they gave me hope. They showed me that I wasn't inherently unlovable or undeserving of care. The problem wasn't me, it was the environment I'd been born into. Still, As much as I cherished their support, I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Their generosity was a constant reminder of everything my own family failed to provide. It made me question why my parents couldn't do the same. Was it so hard to care? To notice when someone needed help? To treat someone with kindness instead of resentment? Those questions gnawed at me, but I never found any answers. The twins' family became my refuge. Their home was a place where I didn't have to walk on eggshells or brace myself for the next argument. It was a place where I could simply exist, free from the weight of my parents' expectations and failures. I didn't have to prove my worth or fight for their attention. They accepted me as I was, flaws and all. Their generosity extended beyond material support. They taught me lessons my own family never could. They showed me what it meant to be kind, to be selfless, to care for someone without expecting anything in return. Those lessons shaped me in ways I'm still discovering. They planted the seeds of resilience and compassion, giving me the strength to navigate the chaos of my life with a little more hope. But even as I found solace in their kindness, I couldn't escape the shadows of my past. The echoes of my parents' fights, the indifference of my extended family, and the constant feeling of being unwanted lingered in the background, a constant reminder of where I came from. No matter how much love and support the twins' family gave me, I couldn't fully shake the sense of abandonment that had been ingrained in me since childhood. That sense of abandonment wasn't just an emotional wound, it was a lens through which I viewed the world. It colored my relationships, my decisions, and my sense of self-worth. It made me question whether I truly deserved the kindness the twins' family showed me. Part of me couldn't help but wonder if they would eventually tire of me, the way my own family had. But they never did. They stood by me, unwavering, even when I doubted myself. In the chaos of my life, they were a constant, a beacon of hope in a storm that threatened to consume me. Their kindness didn't erase the pain of my past, but it gave me the strength to keep going. It showed me that even in the darkest moments, there could be light. And for that, I will always be grateful. The weekend felt suffocating from the start. My mom's side of the family descended on us like a storm, and I was pushed to the periphery of my own home. It wasn't unusual for me to be treated like an afterthought, but this time it felt particularly cruel. My grandparents were given my room, leaving me to set up camp in the office, a cramped and sterile space that barely felt livable. It was as if even the physical arrangement of the house reflected my place in their world, secondary, invisible, unimportant. I spent most of the weekend locked away in that office. Not out of rebellion or spite, but because being around my family drained me in ways I couldn't fully explain. Their conversations were loud and full of warmth, but it wasn't a warmth that extended to me. I felt like an outsider looking in, watching them enjoy each other's company while I remained on the fringes. They didn't ask how I was or invite me to join in, they barely seemed to notice I was there. By Sunday, the tension had reached a boiling point. My grandparents cornered me in the hallway, their expressions a mix of frustration and disapproval. They didn't mince words. They told me I was acting like such a teen, as if that was the worst thing I could possibly be. They accused me of sulking, of wasting the weekend by isolating myself instead of enjoying time with the family. The word family felt like a dagger aimed straight at my chest. I couldn't hold back anymore. I told them the truth, or at least my version of it, the version I'd lived and breathed for 16 years. I told them I didn't have a family. What I had were people who saw me as a burden, people who didn't care about me or what happened to me. My voice cracked under the weight of the words, but I forced myself to keep going. I said that family wasn't supposed to feel like this, like a collection of strangers bound by obligation rather than love. It was supposed to mean something more, something real. Their reaction was as predictable as it was infuriating. They dismissed my pain, waving it away like an annoying fly. They told me to quit being dramatic, to stop acting like the world was against me. They accused me of exaggerating, of wallowing in self-pity. But their words didn't sting as much as I expected. They didn't deny what I'd said. They didn't argue that I was wrong, that I was loved, that I was part of the family. Their silence on that front said everything. I told them I never claimed anyone hated me, only that they didn't care. Indifference was worse than hate, in many ways, because at least hate implied some level of emotional investment. Indifference was cold, empty, and unyielding. I explained that I'd found people who did care, people who showed me what it meant to be part of something bigger than myself. The twins' family had given me the kind of support I'd never experienced growing up, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise just to spare their feelings. My grandparents were visibly offended, their faces a mask of indignation. To them, I was the ungrateful child who didn't appreciate what I had. They didn't see the years of neglect, the countless nights I'd cried myself to sleep wondering if I was truly unlovable. They didn't see the fractured relationships, the endless cycle of abandonment and disappointment that had defined my life. To them, my words were a personal attack rather than a desperate attempt to be heard. They stormed off after our confrontation, but the damage was already done. They made a big deal out of it, telling everyone in the family how I'd hurt their feelings. By the time I returned home from work the next day, the fallout had reached my mom. She told me my grandparents expected an apology, that I had crossed a line and needed to make things right. Her tone was sharp, laced with frustration, but it wasn't anger that stood out to me, it was detachment. She didn't care about the truth behind my words, only about smoothing things over with her parents. The irony of it all was almost laughable. My grandparents didn't even know I had a phone, let alone my number. The device I used to stay connected to the few people who cared about me was a gift from the twins' parents, a secret lifeline they'd provided without asking for anything in return. It was a small detail, but it spoke volumes. My own family didn't even know the most basic things about me, yet they demanded apologies and respect as if those were rights they'd earned. That night, as I sat alone in the office, the weight of everything hit me all at once. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to make sense of my place in a family that didn't want me. I thought about the moments when I'd hoped for something better, only to be let down time and time again. And I thought about the people who had stepped in to fill the void, who had shown me that love and care didn't have to be conditional or fleeting. In some ways, the confrontation with my grandparents felt like a breaking point. It forced me to confront the truth I'd been avoiding for years. I wasn't going to find the love and support I needed from my family. That realization hurt more than I could put into words, but it also gave me a sense of clarity. I didn't have to keep chasing something that wasn't there. I didn't have to keep waiting for people to care about me when they'd made it clear they never would. The twins' family had taught me that I didn't have to settle for the scraps of affection my own family occasionally threw my way. I deserved more than that. I deserved to be surrounded by people who valued me, who saw me as more than an inconvenience or a burden. And for the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find that outside the brokenness of my past. But even as I tried to hold onto that hope, a part of me still ached for what could have been. I didn't want to need the twins' family as much as I did. I didn't want to rely on them to fill the gaps left by my own parents and grandparents. But I couldn't deny that they had become my lifeline, my anchor in a storm that showed no signs of letting up. They were my family in every way that mattered, and I was finally starting to accept that. The fallout from my conversation with my grandparents spread like wildfire, fueling another round of chaos in my already volatile family. My dad left the house that same evening, slamming the door behind him, and I haven't seen him since. It's not the first time he's walked out, but this time felt different. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe it was the realization that he wasn't leaving because of an argument with my mom, he was leaving because of me. That thought lingered, twisting itself into a knot of guilt and resentment that refused to untangle. The next day, when I came home from work, my mom was waiting for me. She wasted no time delivering her message. Her parents felt hurt, and I owed them an apology. The way she said it, like she was reciting a script rather than having a genuine conversation, only made things worse. It wasn't about what I'd said or why I'd said it. It wasn't about the years of neglect or the pain I'd carried in silence. It was about appearances, about smoothing over the latest family drama so everyone else could move on without addressing the root of the problem. And the kicker? They had texted her about it because they didn't even know I had a phone. A device that had become my lifeline, my connection to the only people who truly cared about me, was invisible to them. They had no idea it existed, just like they had no idea what my life looked like beyond the fragments they occasionally witnessed. My grandparents, my parents, my entire extended family, they didn't know me. Not really. And the fact that they expected me to apologize for speaking my truth felt like a slap in the face. As I sat in my room, well, technically the office, since my room had been commandeered for the weekend, I couldn't shake the feeling of being caught in a losing battle. I had tried to be honest, to express what I had been holding inside for years, and it had only led to more turmoil. My words, which had felt so powerful in the moment, now seemed small and futile in the face of their collective denial. Maybe I had been wrong to say what I did. Maybe I had gone too far. Or maybe, deep down, I knew I was right, and that scared them more than they were willing to admit. The truth is, I didn't care about their feelings as much as I probably should have. It's hard to feel empathy for people who have spent your entire life treating you like an afterthought. My grandparents' hurt feelings didn't erase the years of indifference and dismissal. My dad's departure didn't negate the times he had chosen his own freedom over being a parent. My mom's frustration didn't erase the countless nights I had spent wondering if I mattered to her at all. Their reactions were just echoes of a pattern I knew all too well: deflect, dismiss, and move on without ever truly addressing the problem. But even as I told myself I didn't care, a part of me still ached for what could have been. I didn't want to be the kid who had to rely on someone else's family for support. I didn't want to feel like a stranger in my own home. I didn't want to be the source of yet another fight between my parents. I wanted things to be different. I wanted a family that didn't see me as a burden, a family that would choose me, not out of obligation, but out of love. That longing was the hardest part to reconcile. Because no matter how much I tried to distance myself from them, no matter how much I told myself I didn't need them, there was a part of me that still hoped for something better. That hope, fragile and flickering, was both my greatest strength and my deepest vulnerability. It kept me going, but it also left me exposed to the pain of disappointment. The twins' family continued to be my anchor through the storm. They didn't push me to talk about what had happened, but they were there in all the ways that mattered. Their quiet support spoke volumes, reminding me that I wasn't as alone as I felt. They didn't demand apologies or expect me to conform to their expectations. They just let me be, offering a safe space where I could breathe and process everything at my own pace. As the days turned into weeks, I started to find clarity amidst the chaos. I realized that my words to my grandparents weren't just an outburst, they were a declaration of my truth. For the first time, I had refused to play along with the narrative my family had constructed around me. I had spoken up, not to hurt them, but to assert my own value, to claim a piece of the identity they had tried so hard to erase. And that mattered. It mattered more than their hurt feelings or their demands for an apology. I stopped waiting for my dad to come back. I stopped trying to explain myself to my mom. I stopped expecting my grandparents to see me for who I really was. Instead, I focused on the people who did see me, who valued me, who made me feel like I belonged. The twins' family became my home in every sense of the word, a place where I could grow and heal without fear of rejection. They didn't replace my parents or erase the pain of my past, but they gave me something I had never had before, a foundation to build on. In the end, I realized that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about the people who show up, who stay, who love you for who you are. It's about the connections you choose to nurture, the relationships that lift you up instead of tearing you down. My parents, my grandparents, my extended family, they had all shown me who they were. And while that hurt, it also freed me. I didn't have to keep chasing their approval or longing for their love. I could let go of the weight they had placed on my shoulders and move forward on my own terms. So, Am I the asshole for what I said? Maybe. Maybe not. But I don't regret it. For the first time in my life, I chose to stand up for myself. I chose to speak my truth, even if it wasn't what they wanted to hear. And in doing so, I took the first step toward reclaiming my sense of worth. It's not an easy journey, and there are days when the weight of it all feels unbearable. But I'm learning, slowly but surely, that I don't have to carry it alone. And that makes all the difference.